how many times did it happen? Once, twice, a month? So people tend to worry about these things. And they sort of plan for this, and what if this happens? And I'm like, try it. For God's sake, just go out there and try it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen, right?
You're right. Yeah.
And that's the spirit of entrepreneurs that needs to come back into organizations. Because today, the problem with organizations, or the challenge for the organization, is they have to hire people. And these people have lots and lots of options. They can go to other organizations. They can start their own business. 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't, I've done 2 or 3 startups that haven't done well, starting from mid-90s when I first did a startup, right? And it was tough. But, come the years 2000 plus, it's become relatively easy to do a startup.
Talking with the experts.
Hello and welcome to Talking with the Experts. And Talking with the Experts is about all things business by business owners for business owners. My name is Rose Davidson from rosesdavidson.com. And today my guest is Anwar Jumabhoy. And he works closely with entrepreneurs and CEOs as a mentor and business coach. And he serves on the advisory panel of the Taylor's University School of Hospitality and School of Business. He has been a mentor at the Malaysian Global Innovation and Creative Centre for the Southeast Accelerator Program, Malaysia's first social enterprise accelerator designed to improve lives and build a sustainable world. Good afternoon, Anwar. How are you today?
I'm well, Rose. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh,
and
thank you.
It is afternoon for both of us, I think.
I think it is, yes.
Now with virtual, one is a little bit reluctant to use the word good morning or good afternoon, because you really don't know whether that's the case for the viewer.
So tell me a little bit about what you do other than working at the university.
So I work with entrepreneurs and executives to try and, in a way, get them a little unstuck, right? So people seem to understand the word intrapreneur, and people tend to understand that they need to do some things differently, but they are always a little afraid to move away from process. And so the work I do is really to encourage them to think about problems and to think about solutions and to think about objectives the way entrepreneurs think about them. So entrepreneurs are very outcome focused, right? We focus on the outcome as opposed to the process, right? Whereas companies, as they grow, they get so embedded into process that they're so afraid to let go of the process because they don't know, right? I mean, they're doing their little job and the next person is doing their little job. And a lot of companies just run out of what's the job they're supposed to do. So these are difficult questions, and all businesses need to ask them, right? Because all businesses need to understand their purpose and find it.
Yes, I agree. I think that a lot of people. I know when I used to contract to different organisations, and as an outsider, I could see that some of their processes were either outdated or too lengthy, and of course, I could always find better ways of doing it. But, as an outsider, they didn't like someone coming in and making comment on that. So I guess as an outsider in coming into a business, how does one work around that so that they can work within the process that's already there and try not to, rock the boat, as it were?
I think you have to first start by giving assurance, right? So I don't do consulting. I don't do, basically, what I tell organizations is, this is the problem, this is the path to the solution. And you need to walk that path with the people that you have, right? Consultants come and go, as I say, entrepreneurship has been there before consultants, before business schools, before business professors, before business models. I mean, they've been there from the beginning, right? So, but people are, of course, feeling insecure. When you come in and you want to change something, or you're inside and you want to change something, people need that assurance, right? People need that assurance that, hey, how is it going to impact me? Does it impact my job? Does it impact my self-worth? And so these are the issues that you need to start with. So companies that make this transition, and companies that embrace entrepreneurial behaviors, and large companies do too, right? So you have the Chinese companies hire, you have FMCG companies like Reckitt Benckiser, etc. They absorb entrepreneurial behaviors, but they start with one premise: everybody is important to us, and we're not going to let anybody go. You really have to start with that. If people feel that their job is threatened, they're going to find all sorts of reasons why it shouldn't change.
That's an interesting concept. It's there is resistance a lot of times to change within organisations, and sometimes it's not from the people that have been there the longest either. Sometimes it's the ones that have been the newest that don't like the change within an organisation, because, as you say, they feel threatened that their position is going to be taken away, or they're going to be made redundant, or whatever the case may be. So change within organisation is very good if it's done correctly and handled in the right way.
Yeah, so it's not a question of tenure in an organization, right? So you need to find, and what the pandemic has done is it's made things better in one way, because companies have had to find new ways of working. And the things that companies said that they couldn't do, and they've been saying for years that they couldn't do, suddenly they're doing, right? So you have this bizarre thing. And like working from home, right? You get all the background sounds, the doorbell, the local mosque, etc. So companies have adopted this way of working, which they said was not possible. But at the same time, it's also exposed a bunch of people who find that they don't have very much to do. And they're asking themselves, and companies are asking themselves, do we need these people? And so these are two sides of what has been a forced change, right? And companies need to reconcile this. Okay, maybe you don't need them and they feel unneeded, but what do you want to do? You have to address this issue, right? Are you're going to keep them, retrain them, reskill them? I mean, I was talking to one company recently, and they are trying to upskill their people so that these people can leave and go and get a job outside the organization. And I told the HR manager, this makes no sense whatsoever. This is a person they know your company. You're giving them a new skill and asking them to go and compete with people outside who have had this skill building for a number of years now. They can't compete, right? So if you really are interested in these people, don't talk about reskilling them for the outside world. Think about reskilling them for your company.
It makes more sense. I would have thought, it was, I don't know, silliness to reskill your current staff to be able to work outside your organisation. What a waste of money. What a waste of time.
Well, this is the soft way of having to let go people, right? So companies feel guilty. It's like saying, I'm going to give you a wok and a ladle and teach you how to fry, and then please go and get a job somewhere else.
Yes, you are right. I know here when the Holden car manufacturing company closed down a few years ago, and they did the same. They reskilled the staff because obviously they could only do car repairs. But where were they going to get jobs outside of the organisation when, manufacturing cars was all that they knew? And they perhaps weren't suited to be retrained in anything else. So consequently, a lot of them are still unemployed because
Yes.
they just don't fit anywhere. It's like putting a square peg in a round hole, really.
It's just it's just that the industry has changed, and there's a mismatch of skills. Now, on a positive note, in Malaysia, and you've probably seen it in Australia as well, with people staying at home, they have looked for other things to do, and they've been able to match their skill with their passion and find a living. And that's very entrepreneurial, right? You cannot find a business or run a business if you don't have a skill. So they're passionate. They had an underlying skill, which they've now put into use, and they've created a business. So there are loads and loads of now home baking, home food delivery, local preservatives. Loads and loads of businesses have suddenly cropped up because people say, hey, I like doing this, and it seems I can make a living. I run my own time, and I don't have to worry about somebody letting me go. So, the whole package is much more attractive than working for somebody else. And that's the challenge when I talk about how work is going to change and how learning is going to change. So there are two things that come out of it. One is learning has changed because you now only need to do short courses, build a skill, and start earning. You don't have to go to university for 3 years, and 9 of your classmates are not going to end up in the job that they went to university for. Only 1 out of 10 actually does that. So you delay your earning for 3 years. That's crazy. And I think university system is broken, right? So what's happening now is people are going to do short courses in the skill areas that they're interested in, the passion that they're interested. So they're going to adopt a model which I call learn, do, earn. Learn, do, earn. And I think you've probably seen it in your career as well, right? You develop a skill, you do, and you make money from it. Well, why do you want to go to university and wait?
That's actually, I actually went and did a human resource management degree some years ago. And I thought, because I was really passionate at the time about working in an organization and, making sure all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. And and I thought, what a waste of time, really. I could have been earning money in that time rather than going to learning how to be an HR manager.
So it relates to the second wave, which I talk a lot about, which is how work is going to change, right? So if work is going to become more gig, that means that you can hire anybody from anywhere, not just from down the street, right? So you can hire the best talent and you can build companies that are really, I talk to a lot of companies that going to work means scheduling a meeting on Zoom. It's no longer going into the office. It's no longer in the same town. It's not in the same time zone, right? So distributed working has become the norm, right? What have HR managers done to reskill themselves to hire distributed workers? What have HR managers done to reskill themselves to hire people based on skills and not degrees? So far, sorry?
I don't think they've done a great deal. I think they've just been continuing on the way they've been
doing forever. This is the change that I speak of. So learning, working, and earning is all going to change. And there are huge implications, right? If you take working, for example, if you don't have to hire people down the road, whose responsibility is it to provide employment? Where is taxation going to come from? So what is going to happen to the people who are not motivated? Those are the ones that will go to university, because the motivated ones will only learn and earn, and the unmotivated ones will be the ones going to university. But who's responsible? Where is taxation going to come from, right? So there are huge implications. Why would you want to go to a university that's ranked, 200, when you can do short courses from universities that are ranked number 1, 2, and 3? Universities are constrained by their physical limitation. If they don't have a physical limitation anymore, you can go anywhere. You can do a short course here, and then do another course there, another course there, etc. And I work with a company now that's doing mobile learning for the logistics industry. So I'm helping them out. And their training, I mean, they have 100 modules. It's all on a mobile app. From onboarding to safety, to pick and pack, to warehouse management, to conflict management, everything is built on an app. Every module is 10 or 12 minutes video animation, answer some questions, and play the game. So if I'm going to learn that way, it means that I can teach people about my organization. I can teach them the skills at very low cost before even they start work. So, these are all changes that are happening, and in a way, it's good, and like everything else, there are going to be some winners and there are going to be some losers.
Yeah, I don't know that necessarily that type of education though is quite good. I think it's fraught with a little bit of danger, because people can cheat through it if they don't actually sit there, or they just play the video but they don't really absorb the information, but they fluke it through the test at the end. What have they learned? Nothing.
But you see, Rose, this is yesterday's thinking. You worry about the 2 or 3%, right?
Yeah,
and we have that tendency to think about, what about the guys? Well, they'll be found out when they start work.
That's very true.
So there's no, many years ago, I ran a fast food business, and we had an issue with quality assurance, right? So it was a burger chain. And so I told the staff that whenever a customer complains about the burger, I want it to be refunded. No questions, no exceptions, right? And then, the store managers, because they're worried about costs, etc., they say, sir, what happens if somebody has eaten, half the burger? I say, I don't care whether they've eaten 9 out of 10 parts of the burger. Even if there's only one piece left, give them the refund. And how many times did it happen? Once, twice, a month? So people tend to worry about these things. And they sort of plan for this, and what if this happens? And I'm like, try it. For God's sake, just go out there and try it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen, right?
You're right. Yeah.
And that's the spirit of entrepreneurs that needs to come back into organizations. Because today, the problem with organizations, or the challenge for the organization, is they have to hire people. And these people have lots and lots of options. They can go to other organizations. They can start their own business. 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't, I've done 2 or 3 startups that haven't done well, starting from mid-90s when I first did a startup, right? And it was tough. But, come the years 2000 plus, it's become relatively easy to do a startup. It's become relatively easy to raise money. And so if you are an employer employing lots of people, you want to hire the best talent. Today, this talent has lots of alternatives. They don't have to come to you. So if you don't get your act together in terms of why do you exist, how are you going to respect people? You're not going to be able to hire people.
No, and I think that is I think in the material world, I suppose that's an issue. Like being online, I don't know. I prefer to work online heaps. Rather than go and walk into an office, I feel much more comfortable where I can sit at my own desk, be comfortable in my jammies if I want to, or whatever, and still do the work. And if I was working for an employer, I'd still probably prefer to work from home. And I think for those reasons, I don't have to get dressed up to do anything. I can still do my job sitting at home. And yes. I think a lot of more employers have to embrace the fact that since the pandemic, people are more comfortable from working from home, and don't become a micromanager just because you can't see them every second of the day. But if they're still producing the work, yes. Then why do you need to have nanny cameras on them all the time? I think it's ridiculous.
So Rose, you've hit the nail on the head, right? So employers have been used to paying people for hours. So they're happy to pay you as long as they can see you for that number of hours. right? They're now struggling with, what is it that Rose actually does? What's the value of Rose's output to the organization? They can't figure, a lot of companies can't figure this out. If they can't figure this out, they can't come to Rose and say, Rose, work anywhere you want. For each widget, I will pay you X, right? So companies have to start to move from pay for output because they've been too used to paying for hours. And paying for hours no longer works. I mean, it never worked before anyway. Just because you were at the desk doesn't mean that you were working.
Absolutely
right?
not.
I mean, why does Google provide meals to people, right? Because Google found out that the loss of productivity is not just the 1 hour of the lunch. It's the 45 minutes before where people discuss where they should eat. And then it's the 45 minutes after where people discuss how was the meal. And so you're not losing that 1 hour, you're actually losing 2.5 hours, right? And so these are all the things that, companies have to grapple with.
Yes, and there are a lot of, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of future-minded business leaders out there. They're stuck in a past mentality rather than a future mentality about how life can look if that your business, your office staff aren't sitting in front of you every single day.
Yep. And some people, they feel good, right? They walk into a room, everybody's sitting down, and nobody knows what they're doing, but everybody's sitting down and seems to be busy. But it is a struggle, right? So maybe I have an advantage because I worked for a budget hotel for a number of years, and we were very highly skilled in outsourcing. So we outsourced everything. So we have 100-room, 200-room hotels that are run by 12 and 15 people because we only provide front desk, right? So we remove the whole purchasing function, we remove the whole recruitment, we remove the whole receiving, we remove laundry, we remove housekeeping. And so we were able to manage our costs on a utilization basis. So that's an advantage. But the other thing is that we were able to give flexibility, and we began to understand clearly what each function was worth. And down to, when you have a booking system, you're paying per booking. When you buy a lock you're paying based on the number of locks you install. So we had much more a mindset of flexible working, and we were very much aware of what is the cost of the output. And so for us, it was easier. Companies
Sorry, I'm just about to sneeze. So.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. I saw a sneeze coming. So, but that's fine. The good thing is we don't have to worry about masks because we're not in the same room.
Absolutely.
You can sneeze and cough as much as you want. The thing I noticed last year during the pandemic is that nobody sneezed or coughed in a supermarket anymore.
No, they don't, do they?
Because everybody would turn around and look at you, right? So suddenly there's no coughs and no sneezes in the supermarket. Everybody's, suppressing it.
Absolutely. You've brought forward some very valid points about employee-employer relationships. Honestly, it's really, I think a lot more businesses have to embrace, those sorts of ideas where, work on output rather than hours, because as you quite rightly said, you could be at work for 8 hours, but how many of those hours were you actually productive, and did you actually do something for the company? I've worked for government organisations, and they're probably the most guilty ones that, people turn up for that 8 hours and probably only produce 2 hours a day of work. So the rest of the time they're around coughing or doing whatever. So.
But it's also, as I've given some talks to people, to organizations who have had to embrace work from home, what I've said to them is there are 2 or 3 misconceptions about working from the office. One is that your 8 hours is an 8-hour productive time. That's bullshit. So put that aside.
Absolutely.
Right? So don't expect somebody to sit at home and have that 8 hours productive time, because he wasn't 8 hours or she wasn't 8 hours productive in the office anyway, right? So focus on tasks. And, treat it like working from home, treat it like kids doing homework. They'll work in spurts, but they'll get it done.
Yeah. I've worked for a few bosses like that, and it's been quite. I mean, I still got paid for my hours, but they weren't very stringent on. It's got to be done. You've got to do these many tasks a day. It was like by the end of the week, I would like this to happen, and so you had all week to do them. And most times, everyone managed to do what they had to do by the end of the week, because that there weren't unrealistic time expectations.
Yeah. And companies over a time, because something happens, they put in a process, something else happens, they put in a process, and then these processes build and build and build and build, and they had good reasons when they started, but those reasons are not valid anymore. And somebody made the comment about air travel, right? When they introduced this thing of restriction on liquids, and then it was restriction on scissors, and then it was restriction on something else. The restrictions never go away. And soon there are going to be other restrictions and other restrictions and other restrictions, and nobody re-examines the whole thing, right? And so we tend to worry about the minority occurrence, and that clouds our judgment. And why did Google and Microsoft and so many companies do away with the probation period? Companies typically had a probation period, right? I'd hire you. In 1 month, you can leave with a day's notice. I can remove you with a day's notice, or 2 months or 3 months or whatever it is. But that system is flawed, because as companies started to look at the data that they had, how many companies were actually asking people to go? The numbers were so small. And then you're burdening an organization with all the requirements to do the follow-up, to do the check-off, to do this, do that, for 3 people that you asked to go in the whole year.
And
you have this whole
to train someone is it's a lot of money.
Yeah, but
I don't think they look at that as a long-term strategy, that if you just employ somebody for put them on probation for 3 months, I mean, look at the money and resources that you've used to train that person for the 3 months, and then then you find out they're not suitable. Well, I think that's a silly idea. You just wasted
exactly
all this
and
money.
you have to start with the premise that I tell people is that the job interview is a meeting of 2 lies. The employee lies about their capability, and the employer lies about what they're offering. So take that as a given, that you're not starting on the best footing. And then you have to start to look at, because you have probation, hiring managers treat their job a little lightly, because they think that if the guy doesn't work out, I can ask him to go, right? So they treat their job a little lightly. Employees sometimes take the job because it's not the job they want, but they're waiting for another one, so they might as well take this one for a bit, right? I mean, net, if you do all the costs, it makes no sense to have probation. No. Get rid of it. You save so much angst. Just focus on a technique, a procedure, a process to get people to leave. That's far better than this whole relying on this probation thing.
No, I think probation is horrible, because they can still put you off work just because their financial circumstances have changed or something. You might be doing the job perfectly, but they've just decided, well, we'll just hire somebody else because the government gives us funding for the 3 months that we've got you on probation, and so then they sack you and they hire somebody else on the same probation. Okay. And then get the government funding for that.
Oh, okay. Those are just running scams. But I did a coaching session for a young boy who was going to join a bank. And prior to joining the bank, I mean, he sort of called up and said, okay, so I'm coming next week, and what do I do and all that? And they say, oh, by the way, we're going to rescind our letter of offer. And he was like, whoa, luckily I didn't make the travel because he was going to relocate for the job. So, I mean, you get employers as you get employees that, perhaps are not doing the right thing. But again, you cannot build a system for
Well, you
this
can't
type.
there's no perfect system, is there?
Exactly. And that's what entrepreneurs recognize, that it has to evolve, right? So you try something, it doesn't work, try something else. Maybe it doesn't work, right? So when we opened the hotel in KL, I introduced for the first time in our group permanent night shift. So there's a night shift and there's a day shift. And everybody said, oh, nobody's going to apply. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, let's see, you adjust the pay scales, you adjust the conditions. We got enough people to start. It's the same thing with incentive schemes, right? So we run an incentive scheme and we change it every 3 months. It's okay. Doesn't have to be cast in stone. And yet organizations spend all this time developing this system and they want it to be foolproof and they think of all the scenarios. And I'm like, hey, just tell people we're going to try this, right? It's not perfect. And if it doesn't work, bear with us, we'll change.
Yes.
And these are what younger, more entrepreneurial organizations are doing, and they are attracting talent.
They are, yes. Yeah, because people want it. They don't want to work under outdated laws or rules or whatever. That's why I never got to work in many organizations after a time, because I was too busy trying to I could see flaws in their processes, and because being a temporary employee, mentioning those was like, oh my God, how dare you, but they couldn't see that what they were doing, because we've been doing it for years.
Yes.
But there's some way that you could do the same thing, but in a shorter period of time, and they couldn't see that. So I don't know, I gave up in the end.
There are many paths for everybody. So
yes,
and increasingly more with the passage of time. So
Anwar, tell me about the books you've written.
Oh, it's only been one. It was a major exercise, and it's called 9 Entrepreneurisms, Management Practice for a VUCA World. And it's basically drawing on the 9, what we call traits and practices of entrepreneurs that companies and individuals can adopt, can use. And the 3 that are most commonly associated with entrepreneurs are risk-taking, passion, and what the core is self-efficacy. You have to have that skill set. So the skill set, the risk-taking, and the passion are the 3 that are most commonly associated with entrepreneurs. But they're equally relevant to companies. So companies need to understand how to take risks, because otherwise somebody's going to knock them out. And passion, you can create passion in an existing car. I worked for a budget hotel group. We managed to create passion because we got people passionate about saving the environment. Having a small room is good. The air conditioning going off when you come out is a good thing. Don't be shy about it. So
yeah, but I mean, honestly, where businesses started off by an entrepreneur in the first place who has come up with the idea. Henry Ford was an entrepreneur to start Ford Motor Company, but it's the people that he hires who change the culture, I think.
Yeah, and you see, there was a period of time, and particularly, Henry Ford, I think, was 1905. There was a period of time where scale was important, and to achieve scale, you needed consistency, and you needed to have a very, very well entrenched system, a process, right? So Henry Ford's brilliance was not about creating the automobile, but about using standardized parts to build an automobile, because automobiles were custom built, right? And his genius was really standardizing the parts so that he could buy from many places and build the car. And that's why it became so cheap. All right. It wasn't the mass production of the car, because to do the mass production of the car, you needed to have availability of the parts. And he was able to organize it in a way that the parts became standardized, something that we take for granted today. but it didn't exist in the early 1900s.
No, they didn't. No, and production lines were, unheard of until Henry Ford came along. So,
well, it's the same in the clothing industry. If you go back to 1700s and 1800s in the UK, very few people had more than 2 changes of clothing because you had to make it yourself. It's only with the industrialization, with the steam engine, and unfortunately with a lot of sweatshops, that people went from this rural economy to a industrialized economy. The clothes became standardized, ready-made was available, factory workers had income, and so it was a nice feed-on-feed cycle, right? So you had people earning money, and then they were working in factories that were producing goods, and they were able to consume it. So they built a very nice.
But an entrepreneur had to start that process in the first place, didn't they?
Well, as I said, entrepreneurs have existed since the beginning of time. There's
Absolutely.
there's a very wise man who set up Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. They lend small amounts of money primarily to women as a co-op system. And Yunus said that we're all born entrepreneurs. When we lived in the caves, we didn't write a resume and post it to the caveman next door and say, please hire me because my wife and kids are hungry. So entrepreneurship is there, it's inside us. We are entrepreneurial, but somehow the organization asks us to park it outside the door when we come to work.
I think it's sad, isn't it?
I mean, there is a place for process, but process only works so far, right? And if you're dealing with changing circumstances, the 2 things are happening, right? The way you produce is changing very rapidly. The market is changing very rapidly. And if you just sit there and say, I'm not going to respond, I'm just going to look at my process. I mean, that's the famous examples of, the bookshops and all the other companies, they just looked at their process and they said, we cannot predict when change will happen. So you cannot say, I'm going to pick the right time to change because you don't know, you have no control on that. You have to be ready for change. And so we are now moving to a world where you just need to be ready. You need to be ready all the time.
Absolutely. I think the pandemic has made it imperative that we are all ready for change because we've had to change in the last 18 months, 2 years, because we've had no choice. And the businesses that have remained viable and open have seen the light, as it were, and have changed the way they actually do stuff because they've had to stay in business. And the ones that have closed, I think, I'm not saying all of them, I'm just saying that a good proportion of them have not been too rigid in their processes or whatever it is that they're doing. So they haven't seen the light and know that they have to do something different.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at logistics, for example, because the pandemic has restricted planes and ships, there's a whole bunch of new routes that have opened across Europe using trucks, which, people never thought of. But when faced with freight rates that were exorbitant, a lot of these guys said, I can't pay this. And other people, entrepreneurs, came up and said, well, if I route it through 6 stops instead of 2, I can bring the cost down by 80%. And they're like, oh, hell, why not? I can wait a bit longer. I'll organize myself.
Yeah.
But I just can't afford to pay that price, right? So the shift in the pandemic has been massive, right? I don't know whether Australia gets medical tourism, but for 2 years, nobody's been able to go to travel outside their own country.
No, we haven't been able to either.
Yeah, so what has that done to medical tourism? People were falling ill, people needed procedures. They didn't go to UK or Australia, etc. They got the procedures done, right? Now when the borders are open, do you think that people are going to start to go overseas again? I don't know. Right? You've had to deal with less workers because there've been less workers in the market. So you've made some changes. When workers become available, are you going to go back to that model? I don't think so.
I don't know. I think things will never be the same as what they were ever.
Exactly.
We will never go back to that normal that we knew life then 2 years ago. There's a new normal now, and there will be continuing to be a new normal every single day, because life at the moment is just more unpredictable than ever before. So
yeah, and so it takes that, as I said, the three waves are how you learn, how you work, and how you earn, and these three are going to be fundamental to change the way society works. What it's going to be, I don't know, but
no.
But it's not going to be what it was before.
No, I think we might leave it there. That's a really good thought, to actually leave the thought at, with something for people to think on. And where can people reach out to you if they want to hear you speak or or work with you?
The easiest is on LinkedIn, or the QR code on the screen will give you a bunch of links to get me. But LinkedIn is probably the easiest. Happy to connect, and happy to schedule a chat with people who want to talk through some issues that they face.
Perfect. All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having this discussion with you. I think it's hopefully enlightened a few people out in the audience. That perhaps they shouldn't be so rigid in how they running their businesses, and changing their processes a little bit to suit what's happening now in the world.
Exactly. And look at, Australia is playing in the T20, Malaysia is not. But you can see how some of the commentators have said that the game of cricket has changed. It's not the same game that it was 10 years ago. No,
everything's different. Even the football here is all different. So, it's... Anyway, it's been lovely to chat with you, and I will talk to you again. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Talking with the experts.